The sun had just begun to dip behind the rolling hills, casting long, golden shadows across the dusty ranch. The wind carried the faint scent of hay and worn leather, mingling with the earthy aroma of the pastures. A lone figure moved slowly along the fence line, each step careful and deliberate. His hands were calloused, his clothes patched and faded, and his face bore the lines of a man who had known hard work all his life. Yet today there was a spark in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a strange mixture of hope and worry that clung to him like the dust in the air. At the edge of the corral stood a horse unlike any the ranch had seen in years. Its coat was dull, its mane tangled, and one leg bore a limp that made each step painful. Most would have passed it by, dismissing it as old and broken, but the ranch worker lingered. He had spent his final 20 coins on this animal, a sum that had taken every last effort of saving and sacrifice. The horse's eyes, dark and deep, met his gaze with a quiet intelligence that seemed almost human. There was something about the creature that spoke of stories untold, of secrets carried across miles and years, of a life lived in the shadows of the open fields. The neighbors and other ranch hands had laughed when they saw him approach the corral, shaking their heads at the idea of spending his last money on a lame horse. "You're throwing it all away," one had said, his voice tinged with disbelief. Another had scoffed, pointing at the horse's swollen joints and weary frame. But the ranch worker had only smiled faintly, stroking the animal's neck with a tenderness that betrayed no regret, only a quiet determination. He sensed something others could not, something hidden beneath the worn hide, waiting for the right hands to uncover. He led the horse to a small shelter near the barn, careful not to jostle it too much. Each step was slow, deliberate, almost reverent. As he guided the animal, he felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. 20 coins were all he had left, enough for a week's provisions, maybe a month if he was careful. Yet he had chosen the horse, and somehow he knew the choice was not just about the animal's survival, it was about what the horse carried, a mystery that would change everything he thought he knew about his world. That night, as the ranch worker cleaned the stall and fed the horse the last of his provisions, he noticed something strange. Beneath the horse's saddle, tucked into the worn leather, was a small folded piece of cloth. At first he thought it might have been caught in the tack by accident, but there was a weight to it, an intentionality that made his pulse quicken. Carefully, he unfolded it and found a faint etching symbols and lines he had never seen before. They were crude yet deliberate, like a secret map, a message meant for someone who knew how to read it. The horse nickered softly, as if acknowledging his discovery, and he felt a shiver of both awe and unease. The wind whispered through the barn, carrying the faint sound of distant cattle and the creak of the old barn doors. The ranch worker sat on a crate, examining the cloth by the flickering light of a lantern. Questions swirled in his mind. Who had left this? How had it ended up here with the horse? And why had he felt compelled to spend his last money on an animal that seemed, in every way, ordinary? The answers were just beyond reach, teasing him with the promise of revelation, yet stubbornly hidden behind the horse's calm, knowing gaze. As dawn broke, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, the ranch worker led the horse out to the fields. Its limp made him wince, but the creature moved with a surprising strength, as though it had carried burdens far heavier than his own. Neighbors watched from a distance, still skeptical, whispering among themselves about the foolishness of his choice. But he ignored them, focused on the bond forming with the horse and the mystery it seemed to guard. Each step across the morning dew felt significant, as if the land itself was waiting for the right moment to reveal what had been hidden for so long. The days that followed were a careful dance of observation, care, and quiet investigation. The ranch worker noticed the horse behaving strangely near certain spots, pawing at the earth, nuzzling at hidden corners of the pasture, or casting an almost human-like glance toward the hills beyond. Each act was subtle, but together they formed a pattern, a silent communication that he could not yet understand. He began to suspect that the horse was leading him somewhere, guiding him with patience and instinct toward a secret buried deep in the landscape. Word of the horse and its unusual behavior began to spread through the small community. Curious neighbors would stop by, watching as the ranch worker followed the animal across the fields and into the woods at the edge of the property. Some doubted, some laughed, but a few could see the strange connection between man and horse, the unspoken understanding that grew each day. It was as though the horse held a key to a world that no one else could perceive, a world tied to the past, the land, and secrets that had been buried long before any of them arrived. Late one evening, while the sun dipped low behind the distant hills, the ranch worker noticed something glinting in the horse's mane. A small metal clasp, worn with age, catching the last light of day. He reached carefully, freeing it and discovering a tiny, hidden compartment within the horse's tack. Inside was a folded paper, brittle and yellowed with time. The markings were similar to those on the cloth he had found before, but more intricate, containing what appeared to be instructions and symbols that hinted at a deeper mystery. His heart raced. It was clear now that the horse was more than a companion, it was a guardian of knowledge, carrying a secret that demanded patience, courage, and careful attention. The ranch worker's nights became restless with anticipation. He could barely sleep, turning over every mark, every symbol, trying to understand the language of the horse's hidden messages. The animal's calm presence was both comforting and maddening, guiding him in ways he could not yet fully comprehend. Each day brought small discoveries, traces of paths in the fields, hidden markings near the stream, the horse pausing near certain rocks as if to say, "This way, follow me." The suspense was relentless, yet there was a rhythm to the mystery, a subtle insistence that the truth would be revealed to those patient enough to notice. On one particularly quiet afternoon, the ranch worker followed the horse to a secluded grove at the edge of the property. The horse stopped, ears twitching, and nudged at a pile of brush. Beneath it, partially covered by leaves, was a wooden box, weathered but intact. His hands trembled as he lifted it, feeling the weight of the years and the hidden knowledge it contained. The markings on the box matched the symbols he had seen before, and he realized that this was the culmination of what the horse had been leading him toward. But the contents remained a mystery, hidden behind the lid that had not been opened in decades, if not longer. The horse watched him intently, as though aware that the moment had arrived. The ranch worker knelt, careful not to disturb the surrounding brush, and opened the box. Inside there were more papers, some maps, and small artifacts, tools, trinkets, and objects whose purposes he could only guess. Each piece seemed deliberate, each carefully placed as though someone had known that one day a patient and dedicated person would find them. The horse nickered softly, shifting its weight, and he felt the weight of generations of secrets, preserved through time, resting in his hands. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the grove in a warm, golden light, the ranch worker realized that the journey was just beginning. The horse had led him to the threshold of discovery, and what lay beyond this point could change everything he understood about the land, the past, and the hidden connections that had been preserved by the animal. He could feel the suspense building, the anticipation so thick it seemed to press against his chest. The secret the horse carried was within reach, yet the final truth remained just beyond, waiting for the courage, patience, and wisdom to be revealed. And so, as night settled over the ranch, the worker and the horse stood together, the box at their feet, the wind whispering through the trees, and the promise of discovery hanging in the air. Every sound, every shadow, every subtle movement of the animal seemed to signal that something extraordinary was about to be revealed. The journey that had begun with 20 coins, a worn horse, and a leap of faith was poised to unfold into a story of hidden knowledge, enduring bonds and secrets that would leave everyone who witnessed them astonished. The cliffhanger hung in the quiet of the grove, the night alive with the weight of anticipation. The ranch worker knew that whatever lay ahead would demand everything he had: patience, courage, and trust in the horse that had guided him to this moment. The secret was there, waiting to be discovered, and the journey was far from over. The next morning arrived with a pale light that seeped through the thin slats of the barn, casting long shadows over the corral. The ranch worker barely slept, turning over the events of the previous evening in his mind. The worn horse stood quietly in the corner, eyes following his every move, patient and unyielding as if it had been waiting for him to understand something he could not yet see. Every twitch of its ears, every shift of weight, seemed deliberate, and he felt a growing sense of urgency mixed with awe. The discovery of the box had opened a door, but beyond it lay questions that were far larger than he had imagined. He carefully carried the wooden box out into the yard, placing it on a sturdy stump to examine its contents under the morning light. Each item told a story: the folded maps, the notes with cryptic symbols, the small tools that seemed almost ceremonial in their design. The ranch worker ran his fingers over the carvings and etchings, tracing the patterns as if trying to feel the intentions of the hands that had placed them here decades ago. There was a rhythm to the arrangement, a method that suggested the box was more than a simple container. It was a guide, a manual left behind for someone who would see what others could not. The horse nickered softly, nudging the box with its nose, and the ranch worker shivered. It was as though the animal understood that he was now part of something much larger, a continuity that stretched across generations. He realized that the horse had carried this secret for longer than anyone alive could remember, a living link to the past. The pieces in the box were more than relics. They were clues, leading toward a truth hidden in the land itself, waiting for someone patient and persistent enough to uncover it. He spread the maps on the grass, aligning them with the fields and hills he knew so well. At first they seemed like ordinary layouts, sketches of streams, pastures, and outbuildings, but as he studied them closer, he noticed subtle marks that had gone unnoticed, symbols indicating hidden water sources, shaded areas that suggested shelter, and lines that hinted at pathways through dense forest. The ranch worker's heart raced as he realized that the maps were not just guides. They were a record of survival, a knowledge of the land that had been preserved through careful observation and, perhaps, through the instincts of the horse itself. For days, he followed the horse across the property, noticing how it led him to points that matched the maps. The horse's limp did not slow it down in these moments. It moved with purpose, pausing at precise spots as if to say, "Here, look closer." At one such location near the creek, he found small stones arranged in patterns that echoed the symbols on the maps. Some were natural, but others had been placed deliberately, forming a trail that only those who knew what to look for could follow. Each discovery heightened the tension, feeding a mixture of wonder and fear. The secret the horse carried was immense, and he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Word of his unusual behavior began to spread. Neighbors whispered about the strange relationship between the worker and the horse, some suspecting he had lost his mind. Others, more observant, watched quietly, seeing the subtle intelligence in the animal and the focus in his movements. A few tried to follow him, hoping to catch a glimpse of what he might uncover, but the horse always seemed to lead them astray, returning him to solitude. It was as if the animal understood that the knowledge it carried could not be shared recklessly, that only those who earned it would see the full truth. One evening, after a long day of tracing the paths and examining the small markers hidden along the ridge, he returned to the barn exhausted. The horse waited, standing near the box, its eyes glinting with an almost uncanny awareness. He could feel the quiet tension, the sense that he was being tested, not in strength or endurance, but in patience and understanding. The box had revealed part of the story, but the rest was out there, somewhere across the hills and valleys, waiting for the right moment and the right person to uncover it. The nights were the hardest. The ranch worker lay awake on a thin mattress in the corner of the barn, lantern light flickering across the walls. He replayed each movement of the horse, every pause and gesture, trying to read the subtle cues that would guide him further. The maps, the notes, the carefully arranged tools, they all hinted at something larger, something that connected the horse, the land, and the secret it had carried. He could almost feel the pulse of history in the air, like the land itself was waiting for him to notice its heartbeat. Then, one late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields in amber and gold, the horse stopped at the base of a steep rise that he had never paid much attention to. It pawed the ground, nuzzled at a clump of wild grass, and whinnied softly, a sound that carried a note of urgency. His curiosity and dread intertwined. Something lay beyond that hill, something the horse had been leading him toward all along. His muscles tensed, his mind raced, but he knew there was no turning back. This was the moment the horse had been preparing him for. He climbed the hill slowly, the horse walking beside him with steady patience. When he reached the top, the view took his breath away. Nestled in a hidden hollow was a small clearing, surrounded by trees and partially hidden by the terrain. At the center stood a weathered structure, half collapsed but unmistakably built with intention. It was a shed, but not an ordinary one. It was lined with shelves, containing more of the same artifacts he had found in the box papers, tools, and objects that had survived decades of exposure to the elements. The realization hit him like a blow. The horse had carried the secret to a hidden repository, a place meant to preserve knowledge that could change how they lived on this land. The horse moved cautiously toward the shed, sniffing at the entrance, and then turned to him as if to confirm that he understood. The ranch worker felt the tension rise in his chest. A secret had been out there all along, waiting for someone willing to trust in the instincts of a creature that most would have dismissed as old and broken. The discovery was overwhelming, and he realized that this was only the beginning. Each artifact, each note, each hidden item in the shed promised more answers, but also more questions. How had these been preserved? Who had left them? And why had the horse been chosen as the carrier of this legacy? For the first time he felt a sense of awe mixed with fear. The horse had been patient, guiding him through every misstep, every doubt, every moment of despair. Now the culmination was before him, yet the full meaning remained just out of reach. He ran his hands over the wooden structure, feeling the age of the materials, the weight of the history it carried. Every sound of the forest seemed amplified: the rustle of leaves, the call of distant birds, the creak of the old wood. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, as though the land itself waited for him to act. As night fell, the ranch worker set a small lantern near the entrance of the shed, casting a circle of light that illuminated the dust and debris. The horse lay nearby, ears twitching, watching every move. The worker began carefully examining the contents, unwrapping papers and studying their markings. Each sheet revealed more about the intentions of the original caretakers, the knowledge of how to live in harmony with the land, how to care for the animals, and how to ensure that the environment could sustain those who came after. It was a blueprint, a guide left by people who understood the value of patience, observation, and foresight. The realization settled heavily on him. The horse had been more than an animal. It had been a guardian. It had carried not only a secret but a responsibility, leading him to a truth that required wisdom and courage to protect. Every gesture, every limp, every pause had been purposeful, teaching him that discovery was not simply about finding what was hidden, but about understanding its significance and the duty that came with it. The suspense that had gripped him for days now transformed into a reverent awareness of the path ahead. The night grew colder, and the stars appeared one by one above the clearing. The ranch worker leaned back against the shed, exhausted yet exhilarated, while the horse rested beside him. He understood that this was a turning point, not the end, but a threshold. The secret was within reach, yet it demanded careful handling, patience, and respect. The horse's eyes met his, calm and knowing, as though to say, "You have begun the journey, but it is only starting." The tension remained, the mystery still thick in the air, but there was a sense of purpose now, a quiet resolve that bound man and animal together in the pursuit of what lay beyond the next discovery. And so, under the pale moonlight, the ranch worker sat with the horse beside him, surrounded by the hidden artifacts, the notes, and the maps. The suspense lingered like the night air, heavy with the weight of what had been revealed and what remained unknown. Each sound of the forest, each shift of the horse, each flicker of lantern light hinted that the next steps would uncover truths far beyond anything he could have imagined. The final 20 coins had bought more than a horse. They had bought a path into a secret that would change everything. The stage was set, the mystery deepening, and the bond between man and horse stronger than ever. The journey had only just begun, and the secret the horse carried awaited its full revelation. The following days carried a tense rhythm, each one stretching long and heavy with anticipation. The ranch worker moved carefully around the shed, unpacking the maps and notes with deliberate hands, each artifact offering a new layer of the secret the horse had been guarding. He had learned to read the horse's gestures like a language, the tilt of its head, The lift of an ear, even the way it shifted its weight to indicate a hidden path or a clue that had been overlooked. What had once seemed like a simple act of compassion, spending his final 20 coins on a lame horse, had grown into a complicated dance of discovery and patience. Every sunrise brought new observations. Streams that were barely visible in the maps revealed their courses when the horse led him along their banks. Hidden glades that seemed empty at first became significant, their rocks and trees marked with symbols that matched those on the papers. The more he explored, the more he understood that the horse's secret was not static, it was alive, intertwined with the land, evolving with the seasons, and demanding careful interpretation. He began to see the landscape not as fields and pastures, but as a network of signals and instructions left for someone who could read them with care. Yet as much as the discovery fascinated him, tension gnawed at the edges of his mind. He was not alone in noticing his unusual behavior. A neighbor, a grizzled rancher who often wandered near the edges of the property, had begun to watch closely. At first he made no attempt to intervene, merely observing from a distance, but curiosity soon turned to suspicion. He muttered to others in hushed tones about the strange horse and the man who seemed to follow it as if guided by invisible threads. Rumors began to creep through the small community, some suggesting the worker had lost his mind, others speculating that he had stumbled onto a secret worth guarding or exploiting. Inside the shed, tensions mounted in different ways. As the worker unrolled maps and studied the etchings, he found contradictions and hidden patterns that made him pause. Some notes described routes that seemed impossible to traverse, while others referenced symbols he could not yet decipher. The artifacts were carefully preserved, but the knowledge they contained was fragile. A single misstep could render the trail meaningless, or worse, expose him to dangers he could not yet see. Each new discovery brought both hope and anxiety, the thrill of uncovering hidden truths tempered by the weight of responsibility. The horse became more insistent during these days. It nudged him towards certain areas, pawed at hidden hollows, or whinnied in ways that seemed almost urgent. One afternoon, following the horse's guidance, he found a small pile of stones arranged in a pattern he had not seen before. At first it seemed random, but careful inspection revealed scratches and marks similar to the ones in the papers. The realization struck him. The horse had been trained, or perhaps instinctively guided, to protect these secrets, to preserve a system of knowledge across time. The depth of the animal's role left him both awed and uneasy. What he had purchased for 20 coins was no ordinary horse, it was a custodian, and the secret it carried could change much more than the way he managed his ranch. Meanwhile, outside the boundaries of the ranch, the community's tension began to rise. The grizzled neighbor and a few others started visiting, offering unsolicited advice, questioning the worker's sanity, or suggesting that he turn over the maps and artifacts to the county for safekeeping. Some were motivated by suspicion, others by greed, and a few by simple curiosity. But every attempt to pry only deepened the mystery, as the horse seemed to sense the intentions of those who approached. It would stand guard, positioning itself between the intruders and the worker, its presence a quiet but unmistakable warning. The worker realized that trust and secrecy were more fragile than he had imagined, and that protecting the knowledge was as important as understanding it. At night, the shed felt alive with the weight of the undiscovered. Lantern light flickered over the papers, casting shadows that danced along the walls, and the worker often caught himself imagining the hands that had left the symbols behind decades ago. Who had entrusted the horse with this burden? Why had they preserved it in secrecy rather than sharing it? The questions were relentless, pressing against his mind as he tried to piece together the significance of each artifact. Meanwhile, the horse lay nearby, its steady breathing a constant reminder that the answers were tied to its instincts, its guidance, and the subtle intelligence that had carried him this far. He began to chart the trails indicated on the maps, walking for hours with the horse beside him. Some routes led to empty clearings or overlooked depressions in the land. Others revealed hidden caches of tools and small objects, each placed with careful attention. One day, following the horse along a steep ridge, he discovered a shallow pit, partially concealed by brush, containing items that matched descriptions in the oldest papers. The pits seemed deliberately hidden, yet carefully maintained over the years. He realized that the horse had memorized these locations, perhaps instinctively, guiding him step by step to what had been preserved for someone who could earn the knowledge. As the days progressed, the workers' understanding deepened, but so did the tension. The community was aware of his obsession, and a few persistent neighbors were beginning to intrude. The horse's reactions grew sharper, sometimes startling the intruders, sometimes standing silently yet immovably, a sentinel guarding secrets older than most could imagine. The worker understood that discovery carried risks both physical and social. The horse's guidance was invaluable, but the stakes were high. One wrong move, one careless revelation, and the delicate balance of secrecy, trust, and history could collapse. Within the shed, the artifacts told more than one story. Some maps appeared to outline not just the ranch, but a network of trails that extended into the surrounding hills, past hidden springs and overlooked valleys. Notes described techniques for land management, preservation, and survival that seemed almost impossibly advanced for the period in which they were created. The worker marveled at the foresight embedded in every document, yet felt the burden of responsibility pressing down. The horse's role was not merely protective, it was instructive, and the worker was beginning to grasp that understanding these secrets fully required patience, intuition, and a willingness to follow the horse beyond what was comfortable or known. In the evenings, when the sun dipped low and the barn's shadows stretched long, he would sit beside the horse studying the latest findings. The animal nickered softly at moments as if affirming his progress, guiding him subtly toward connections he might have overlooked. The suspense was constant, a slow-building tension that refused to ease. Every discovery suggested more hidden layers, every symbol hinted at paths and knowledge still out of reach. It was as though the horse had orchestrated an elaborate game, one that demanded not just action but understanding, observation, and trust. Tensions within the worker himself also rose. Doubt gnawed at him during moments of fatigue, whispering that he had been foolish, that the horse was simply a broken animal, and that the maps and symbols were meaningless relics. But each time he wavered, the horse's behavior, its careful guidance, its subtle nudges toward hidden markers restored his confidence. He began to see that the secret was not simply the artifacts themselves, but the process of uncovering them, of interpreting the horse's guidance, and of understanding the interconnectedness of the land, the animal, and the legacy they represented. Then, one morning, the horse led him to the edge of a dense thicket he had avoided before. Its ears twitched with urgency, and it pawed the ground repeatedly, urging him forward. At the heart of the thicket was a hollowed tree, its trunk split and hollowed in a way that suggested careful manipulation. Inside, he found a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, tied with string that had aged to brittleness. His hands trembled as he unwrapped it, revealing a collection of papers, tools, and a small engraved metal object unlike anything he had seen. The horse nickered, its breath soft in the cool morning air, as if to say, "This is it. What you seek begins here." The worker understood that this moment was pivotal. Every day of careful observation, every subtle cue from the horse, every step across the fields had led to this discovery. But the full meaning of what lay within the bundle remained just beyond reach. The suspense pressed on him, a weight that mingled excitement with unease. He realized that the horse's secret was vast, layered, and far more complex than he had imagined. It would take every ounce of patience, insight, and courage to piece it together, and the challenges ahead were only beginning. Even as he studied the latest discoveries, the sense of impending revelation hung in the air. The horse remained beside him, steady, patient, and unwavering, a constant reminder that the journey was far from over. The mysteries of the land, the artifacts, and the horse's guidance promised answers, but only to those willing to commit fully to the path. Suspense and tension filled the days, each step forward revealing more questions than answers. Each new discovery a challenge to his understanding of the past and the promise of the future. The ranch worker realized that the horse was not merely a companion, it was a teacher, a guardian, and a guide through layers of history that had been carefully preserved for decades. The stakes were high, the mystery deep, and the answers tantalizingly close. And as the sun dipped low once more, painting the fields in long shadows. He knew that the next phase of discovery would demand everything he had learned so far, and more. The journey was ongoing, the secrets alive, and the bond between man and horse stronger than ever. The suspense remained thick, the tension unbroken, and the promise of revelation lay just beyond the next hill, waiting for the patience, courage, and trust required to uncover it. The days grew longer and hotter, the sun casting a harsh glare over the fields as the ranch worker followed the horse through terrain he had long thought familiar. Each step carried a new weight of anticipation, every pawing and nicker of the horse urging him onward toward something he could not yet name. The bundle from the hollowed tree had provided more clues, but the puzzles multiplied as he deciphered the symbols and notes. Streams that had seemed insignificant now hinted at hidden pathways. The arrangement of rocks that once seemed random now formed patterns that he could barely begin to understand. The tension in the air was almost tangible. He could feel it in the sway of the trees, the rustle of the grass, and in the way the horse moved with sudden, alert energy. Something lay ahead, something monumental, and the horse seemed to know the precise moment when it would reveal itself. Each day of searching had taught him to trust the animal, to follow its instincts, but the deeper they went into the network of trails and hidden hollows, the more dangerous and uncertain the path became. His mind was alive with possibilities, and yet the fear of what might await made him hesitate with every step. One afternoon the horse led him to a steep ravine, its edges jagged and shadowed. The maps suggested nothing of this place. Yet the horse pressed forward with confidence, pausing only when it sensed a safe spot for him to climb. Sweat poured down his face, and his muscles burned from exertion, but he followed, drawn by the magnetic pull of the unknown. At the top of the ravine, they reached a plateau where a dense thicket had grown unchecked, the kind that seemed to repel casual explorers. The horse pawed at the ground and let out a low nicker, urging him to peer closer. He took a deep breath and stepped into the thicket, branches clawing at his shirt, and felt a shiver of both excitement and dread. The hidden clearing they entered seemed untouched for decades. Sunlight pierced the canopy in narrow beams, illuminating an area where the grass was unusually short and the soil compacted, as though something heavy had once moved here repeatedly. At the center was a stone marker, half buried, with weathered inscriptions that matched the symbols in the bundle. The ranch worker knelt, brushing away dirt and moss, his heart pounding. The horse stood close, its eyes sharp and intent, ears flicking as if sensing the energy that hummed in the clearing. He realized that this marker was the key, a central point in the secret the horse had been guiding him to all along. But understanding brought no relief. The inscriptions hinted at hidden compartments, concealed treasures, and perhaps warnings he did not fully grasp. The cryptic notes he had studied now made sense in fragments, but the full message remained locked. An annoying tension filled the air. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer, every rustle of leaves carried the possibility of danger, and the horse's sudden alertness reminded him that this was no ordinary discovery. Someone or something might not want the secret unearthed. The worker's mind raced as he pieced together the maps, the inscriptions, and the artifacts. The hidden pathways seemed to extend beyond his property, threading through ridges and valleys that were largely inaccessible. The horse led him to a small hollow nearby, where a rusted metal box lay buried beneath layers of soil and leaves. He knelt, hands trembling, and dug it out. Inside were papers sealed with wax, instruments whose purpose he did not immediately understand, and a folded document that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. The anticipation tightened around his chest like a vice. The horse shifted its weight, restless, nudging him forward as if insisting, "You are close. Don't stop now." For days he returned to the clearing, examining the marker, the box, and the surrounding land. Each day, the horse seemed to sense his growing anxiety and provided guidance that was subtle but unmistakable. It pawed at spots where the soil was loose, sniffed at hidden crevices, and occasionally whinnied softly, drawing his attention to details he had previously missed. The suspense built steadily, an unrelenting pressure that threaded through each sunrise and sunset. He realized that the secret he sought was layered, carefully protected, and that any misstep could undo weeks of painstaking discovery. The community, meanwhile, began to stir with curiosity and suspicion. The grizzled neighbor had noticed his prolonged absences and the occasional glint of excitement in his eyes when he returned. Some speculated he had found treasure. Others whispered that he was meddling in matters beyond his understanding. A few had tried to follow him, hoping to uncover the secret themselves, but the horse always intercepted them, blocking their approach with quiet authority. It became clear to the ranch worker that the horse's role extended beyond guiding him. It was guarding, protecting both the secret and the one who had earned its trust. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the clearing in fiery shades of orange and gold, the worker felt a sense of culmination approaching. The horse led him to a spot just beyond the plateau, where the ground was uneven and littered with roots. The air was thick with a stillness that was almost unnatural. He knelt by a cluster of stones that seemed arranged deliberately, and as he lifted one, a small cavity revealed itself containing a folded parchment. His hands shook as he unfolded it, revealing sketches and notes that seemed to connect every clue he had found so far. The revelation was immense, but the final piece, the ultimate purpose of all these hidden trails and markings, remained just beyond his comprehension. The suspense was unbearable, the tension crackling in every heartbeat. The nights grew restless. He slept little, haunted by visions of the hidden paths, the inscriptions, and the documents. Every sound in the barn or corral seemed amplified: the scrape of a hoof, the wind through the trees, the faint murmur of distant animals. The horse lay beside him, ears flicking, muscles coiled, always alert. There was a sense that something monumental awaited, a secret that could not be fully revealed without precision and courage. He began to understand that the mystery was not just about the artifacts or the land, but about the trust and understanding between him and the horse. The bond they shared had become the key to unlocking what had been hidden for decades. Then, one morning, the horse moved with an urgency he had not seen before. It whinnied sharply and led him along a narrow, overgrown path that had been obscured for years. The ground beneath them fell away into a shallow ravine, and the worker felt a thrill of both fear and anticipation. At the bottom, partially concealed by overgrowth, was a structure that had been invisible from above a small stone building, its door hanging loose on rusted hinges. The air around it seemed charged, heavy with the weight of secrets. The horse nickered, pawing at the threshold, urging him forward. His heart raced. Every instinct told him that what lay inside was the culmination of everything he had followed the horse to uncover. He paused at the doorway, hand resting on the weathered wood, and glanced at the horse. Its steady gaze met his, calm but insistent, as if warning him that what came next would demand all of his attention and courage. The clearing beyond the doorway was shadowed, the faint light of morning slipping through cracks in the walls. He could feel the history pressing down around him, the presence of those who had built this place and entrusted its secret to the horse. The suspense was at its peak, a tension that seemed almost physical, binding him to the land, the horse, and the mystery that had guided him for so long. Every clue, every artifact, every trail had led to this moment. The worker knew that stepping inside meant confronting the full weight of the secret, facing dangers he could not yet imagine, and understanding the depth of what the horse had protected for decades. The sweat on his brow, the ache in his legs, the anticipation in his chest, all of it combined into a singular awareness. The climax of this journey was just beyond the threshold. The suspense stretched taut, unbroken, as he prepared to take the final step forward. The horse shifted its weight, nuzzling his hand, and gave a soft, deliberate nicker. The ranch worker exhaled slowly, heart-hammering, and pushed the door open. The shadows within seemed to move as he stepped inside, the air thick with dust and the scent of aged wood and earth. He could see shapes and outlines, shelves and containers, each one promising answers and demanding understanding. The weight of the secret pressed down on him, and he realized that the final revelation, the culmination of all his efforts, was about to unfold. The tension was unbearable, the suspense absolute, and the horse stood at his side, unwavering, ready to guide him through what was coming. Every nerve in his body thrummed with anticipation. The clues, the maps, the symbols, and the horse's guidance had all built to this single point. The final act of discovery, the secret that had been protected for decades, was waiting inside. And though he could sense the answers within reach, the full meaning, the ultimate truth, remained just beyond his understanding, leaving him on the edge of revelation, poised at the climax of a journey that had begun with nothing more than a lame horse and 20 coins. The moment stretched, heavy with suspense, the barn and clearing silent, except for the soft breathing of the horse and the worker's own heart. What lay within the stone building would change everything he thought he knew. The tension was unbearable, the anticipation absolute, and the mystery that had guided him every step of the way had never been more alive. The air inside the stone building was cool and still, carrying the scent of old wood, dust, and something faintly metallic. The ranch worker's eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light, and he began to make out the details that had eluded him from the doorway. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with small boxes, bundles of papers and instruments whose purposes he could only guess at. The inscriptions on the bundles mirrored the symbols he had studied for weeks, confirming that every step of his journey had been leading here, that the horse had guided him with intention, patience, and a wisdom far beyond ordinary understanding. He knelt beside a weathered chest at the center of the room, noticing that it bore a brand similar to the one on the horse's flank, faint but unmistakable. A shiver ran through him. The horse had been tied to this place in ways he was only beginning to comprehend, a living custodian of secrets that spanned generations. Carefully he opened the chest, revealing a collection of letters, maps, and tools meticulously preserved. Some maps detailed routes across the region he had never known, highlighting paths through hidden valleys, springs, and meadows that had been kept off most contemporary maps. Others contained instructions for preserving the land, caring for animals, and managing resources with a knowledge that seemed almost prophetic. As he read, a broader picture began to emerge. The horse was not simply a companion or guide, it was part of a larger story, a living guardian of a legacy created by those who had valued knowledge and care above wealth or fame. The document spoke of sustainability, of understanding the land and animals in ways that had long been forgotten. Some letters recounted generations of care, passing on lessons in stewardship, patience, and observation. Every word seemed carefully chosen, as if the writers had anticipated someone like the ranch worker, someone willing to listen, to follow the subtle signs, and to honor the trust placed in the horse. He realized that the horse had been more than a guide. It had been a test. Its role had been to lead him, step by step, through observation, intuition, and respect for the land. The deeper he explored, the more he understood the wisdom embedded in every movement, every trail, every pawing at hidden markers. He looked at the animal now, standing quietly beside him, ears forward, breathing steady, eyes alert but calm. The revelation washed over him. The horse had carried this secret all its life, and he had been chosen, in a sense, to understand and preserve it. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the familiar scents of grass, earth, and the distant fields. The ranch worker rose slowly, holding the documents close, feeling both humbled and empowered. The years of toil, the sleepless nights, the tension and suspense, all of it had led to this moment of clarity. He could feel the horse shift beside him, a gentle nudge, reminding him that their journey had been shared, that this discovery was as much the horse's as it was his. As he stepped back outside, the sunlight warmed his face, revealing the landscape in all its beauty and subtlety. The hidden trails, the glades, the streams, and the plateaus were no longer just terrain. They were pieces of a carefully constructed map of knowledge, a living system of understanding the land and its creatures. He walked slowly, letting the horse lead him along a path that now seemed illuminated by understanding. For the first time in weeks, he felt the weight of suspense lift, replaced by awe and gratitude. Every leaf, every stone, every shadow now seemed meaningful, part of a larger pattern that he had only begun to comprehend. He returned to the clearing where the stone marker had stood and carefully re-examined it. The inscriptions now made perfect sense in the context of what he had discovered. He traced the carvings with his fingers, imagining the hands that had created them, the minds that had planned every step, and the trust they had placed in the horse. The realization struck him that this knowledge had been preserved not for profit, not for fame, but for someone who would respect it, who would honor the connection between land, animal, and human in a way that ensured continuity. The horse had been the constant, the living bridge between generations, and he had been chosen to see it through. In the days that followed, he began implementing the lessons he had learned. He repaired fences, tended to pastures, and restored sections of the land with careful attention to the methods described in the documents. The horse worked alongside him, strong and steady, no longer just a guide, but a partner in restoring balance and preserving what had been entrusted to them. Villagers who had once mocked or doubted him began to take notice, curious at the quiet transformation of the land and the calm, deliberate work being done. Some even approached to ask questions, and he shared the lessons in measured ways, revealing the wisdom without endangering the secrecy of the most sensitive knowledge. The bond between the ranch worker and the horse deepened in ways he could not have anticipated. Nights spent reading and deciphering symbols had grown into days of shared labor and quiet companionship. The horse's presence provided reassurance, its instincts guiding him through challenges both physical and moral. He understood now that the secret it carried was more than maps or documents. It was a philosophy, a code of care, respect, and patience that connected past and future. And in honoring that, he found purpose beyond simple survival or wealth. Word of the discovery eventually spread in small, cautious increments. The workers and neighbors who had once whispered and gossiped now approached with respect. They had seen the transformation of the land, the care with which the animals and crops were tended, and the subtle guidance of the horse that had seemed to know exactly what to do. Curiosity turned to admiration, and the ranch worker became a quiet teacher, sharing lessons that had been preserved for generations. He did not speak of all the hidden artifacts or secret trails. Some knowledge, he realized, was meant to remain protected. But the principles, the patience, observation, and respect for the land and animals were lessons he could pass on. The horse, now older but still strong, had revealed the ultimate secret not through words but through action, guidance, and trust. The ranch worker often paused to watch it move across the fields, muscles rippling under a sleek coat, eyes bright and aware. He understood that their journey had been about more than uncovering artifacts. It had been about understanding the interconnectedness of life, work, and stewardship. The horse had chosen him not merely to follow, but to learn, to carry forward the principles embedded in every trail, every symbol, every hidden cache. In time, the ranch began to flourish in ways the worker had never imagined. The fields were healthier, the orchards stronger, and the animals thrived under careful care. Villagers came to see the transformation and left with lessons of their own, inspired by the quiet dedication and profound understanding evident in every corner of the property. The suspense and tension that had defined the search were replaced by steady purpose, a rhythm guided by trust, observation, and the subtle wisdom of the horse. At the end of the day, the ranch worker often sat on the porch, the horse resting nearby. He reflected on the journey from the moment he spent his last 20 coins on a lame animal to the discovery of secrets that spanned decades, hidden for those who would not understand their importance. He realized that value was not measured in gold, but in knowledge, care, and trust. The horse, with its quiet guidance, had changed everything, not just the landscape, but the way he viewed the world, the land, and his own role within it. Even as the sun set over the fields, casting long shadows and painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, he knew that the legacy he had uncovered would continue. The secret carried by the horse had been revealed in layers, partially, fully, and subtly, and now he was its steward, entrusted with the care of the land and the continuation of its wisdom. He understood that the lessons extended beyond property or treasure, beyond curiosity or suspense, into the very fabric of life itself. Patience, observation, trust, and respect were treasures in their own right, and he had learned them in ways no other means could have taught. As night settled and stars emerged, the horse nickered softly, nudging him gently. The ranch worker smiled, realizing that the journey had brought him more than answers. It had brought him purpose, partnership, and understanding. The suspense, the tension, the mystery, they had all served a greater purpose, shaping him, the horse, and the land itself. And now, with the secret revealed and the lessons learned, he felt a quiet peace, a sense of completion that came from knowing he had honored the trust placed in him. The land lay calm, the animals fed, the orchards thriving, and the ranch worker knew that the journey with the horse had changed the course of his life forever. The hidden knowledge, the guidance, the courage to follow despite uncertainty all had led to a resolution that was as much about understanding and care as it was about discovery. He rose, patting the horse's neck, and together they walked through the fields, shadows stretching long behind them, carrying forward the legacy of patience, respect, and trust into the days to come. And though the horse's secret had been revealed, the story it carried, the lessons it had taught would endure, living on in the land, the work, and the hearts of those who took the time to notice, to follow, and to care. The suspense and tension of the journey had ended, but the wisdom remained, a quiet, enduring treasure beyond measure.